I think your insight is so interesting because you've been in business for 20 years.
Yeah.
And anyone that's been in business for 20 years has an incredible kind of wealth of knowledge, the good and the bad. Obviously that's, think about what that is. If people just think about the timeline of not only the world, but this country specifically, like the Great Recession, going through the 2016 election and the 2020 election, which were both shit shows, COVID, the Floyd riot. I mean, there's been some super volatile times in 20 years. And you started your company when you were 23 years old, and now 20 years later, and you've got, I think you mentioned when we said 70 or so employees.
Right around that, yep.
You're almost up to $100 million. Now, is that in projects or revenue?
Yeah, revenue.
Revenue, yep. Incredible. It's amazing, Beta Bay Properties. So what is Beta Bay Properties? First of all, Joe Fall, welcome to the show. We haven't introduced you yet. I don't know if we'll keep in that first part, but we'll see. Joe Fall, thank you for doing this, man. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So Beta Bay Properties, how would you describe your company, Beta Bay Properties?
Yeah, so Beta Bay Properties is a construction management firm, right? And so what that would mean is that we play the general contractor role, and truly we're a construction management firm. So what that means is you would basically pay us a fee, right? To manage the construction process, soup to nuts. So soup to nuts would mean, it looks, maybe it's an old bank, right? A Bank of America on the corner. It's a 2-acre site, and we would go build a car wash on there. So we demo the bank, we put in all the foundations, and we basically turn over the keys, and then a week later they start washing cars. In terms of who is Beta Bay now, I could tell you a little bit of the history if you want.
Definitely, yeah.
Okay, so I would say, who were we, right? So in 2003, so growing up, right? I'll kind of go back.
Yeah, start from the beginning.
Yeah. So was born in Dunedin, Florida. Moved to Toronto when I was real young. Moved to England in, I think, actually kindergarten, first grade, second grade. My dad was not military. He was in the information technology business, so British Telecom, Motorola, that kind of thing. So we were over there. Came back in third grade, and then went to high school at Clearwater Central Catholic. Grew up playing soccer. When you're in England, it's kind of like cricket or soccer, and
right.
Call it football. But so I picked soccer and kind of stuck with it. Ended up being good at it, and so had a lot of good experiences and a lot of team building from that. And then I went to Florida State for 2 years.
Go Noles.
Yep. Got my AA from there. Ended up wanting to, for some reason, just kind of stretch myself a little bit. The group of friends I was with, there was a lot of partying going on. It was just kind of like, man, maybe a little more. It wasn't an angel, but at the same time, it was just like, I think it should be a little bit different. I also came from like a Catholic high school, so it was like way different, right? Mm-hmm. Just in terms of the environment. So I ended up going to University of San Diego. And that was, I would say, like, that was like the moment in my life. So I was 19 years old. This was 1999. That it was the first time, like, I didn't have any friends within 3,000 miles of me. I didn't know anybody. I wasn't on the soccer team because, it just was like, it was fish out of water type feeling. It was actually very scary if I look back on it. And so I just dove into like the library and studying and surfing and trying to make friends and all that kind of stuff. And then had a really positive experience there. Had a teacher that was pretty impactful to me. His name was Dr. Mark Reedy. He actually used to be ex-president of Fannie Mae back in the day. And I started doing really good in his classes. I just liked it. It came easy for me. And so that was kind of like that paradigm shift of like you're stretching yourself. All of a sudden, school started coming easy. I was very organized and disciplined. So, one thing I would say to kids that are in college is, look, just add on an hour before your class or an hour after your class and just go to the library and don't have your phone on. We didn't have phones back then. But all I did was just add an hour on before, an hour after. So that was 10 hours a week. And I literally had no homework. My life was easy. I had no anxiety. I didn't study for anything because I would always just do it in the library. It was like that simple. So 2 hours. Smart. 2 hours a day just like made all the difference in the world for me. So fast forward, surfed the South Pacific for 6 months, Fiji, New Zealand, went to the Maldives, which is in the Indian Ocean. So had a lot of good experiences there. And then from there, I ended.
Do you know Phil Knight's story? Shoe Dog, the Nike
Isn't that
founder?
On Netflix? Or
I think they're going to make a movie about it, and there's a documentary. Okay. But I recently read his book, and he actually did that too. it was either 6 months or a year, and he just surfed around the entire world. But he thought that would make him happy. But what he kind of realized was like, dude, I'm just surfing. Like, what am I doing? Like, I need to get in the game. Like, I need to build a business. I need to do something with my life. Like, surfing is not fulfilling my destiny.
Yeah. So to piggyback off that, not that I'm comparing myself to Phil Knight, but
Right.
you know, I actually had an experience where, I don't know, this is probably like day 100 and something that we're surfing every single day. And at that time we were pretty good. Like, we were in shape. We could hang out there for, you know, we're in the top 5-10%. So we're getting every wave we want, basically. And we were in a place called Burleigh Heads, Australia, which is it's the easternmost tip of Australia. Waves were just cranking like overhead, just perfect waves, easy to ride. We were getting them all. So we did that for 3 days in a row, my brother and I. And we were staying in bunk beds, like a hostel or something like that. And I was on the top bunk. And one night I remember I just started like getting a little teary eyed. And I was like, and Tommy, my brother's name's Tommy, and he's like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I don't know what's going on. Like, I just don't feel good." And he's like, "Oh, maybe you got a bug or sick or something." And I'm like, "No." So anyway, so next morning I just like did not want to surf. And all I remember doing was, there was a library like three blocks away, public library. And I went in there and I literally read Rich Dad Poor Dad. I read like half that book that day, 7 hours. I went back the next day and did it again. On the third day, I went back to surfing. But my point is that those 2 days, it just realized like the reason I was teary-eyed and just didn't feel comfortable was because it was so unfulfilling to be surfing every single day. And the best way I could describe it is like, I felt like my brain was going to mush. Like, I just didn't feel like I was on it. Like, I was losing it a little bit. And that was an interesting part of the story for me, because like what that does now, and again, I got to be careful about what I say in front of my wife certain times, but like it makes me not want to retire.
Yeah, well, that's the classic story, right? The guy, he works his entire life super hard. He saves his money. He's diligent, all to retire, all to move to Florida and to play golf. And when he gets there, he plays golf and he gets better and better and better. And then he's watching guys on TV that are way better than he is. And then he's not satisfied. And he's like, what am I doing?
Yeah, 100%.
So in the same way, in the beginning of life and at the end of life, you still need your purpose.
Agreed. And I would say, I fully agree with that. I would also say that like balance is so important, right? I mean, so I think what happens is, whether you're out of balance to what you think is awesome compared to what you don't think is awesome, right? You've got to have that equilibrium and the balance. So anyway, so that was a good lesson learned for me. Maybe that helped a little bit, just, my energy level, or not, visualizing, I want to retire on an island or whatever those kind of comments are. So again, I want to be in balance. So then I ended up, after that little surf expedition, went to University of Tampa and got my MBA. In entrepreneurship was my emphasis. And we actually started the company when I had about 6 months left in school. So I think we started.
Is that how you found Tampa, was the University of Tampa?
Well, we lived in Clearwater,
Dunedin,
Safety
right.
Harbour, born in Dunedin.
Right.
We were in that neck of the woods. Tampa, I mean, we always knew about Tampa, right? I mean, family lives in Tampa.
Across the bridge.
Across the bridge,
not
20
too
minutes.
far.
Yep. So I don't know. I mean, I applied to San Diego. I applied to a couple schools in Tampa. I had a girlfriend at the time, so that's probably the main reason why I wanted to come back to Tampa. But I was like in crank school out mode, right? So it was 18 months, took every intersection, took heavy loads, didn't work, just because I did a little side job, like a restaurant thing or something. But anyways, just cranked through school. So I got done in 18 months. And again, I don't even want to get credit for it. Was, good job, you went to grad school. I went to grad school because I was very fortunate. And my dad said, if you keep getting education, I'll pay for it. That's the truth. That's why I did it. And so
in a way, was it almost kind of delaying, I guess, the start to real life?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Like, looking back on it, again, I'm not proud to say it, but I think you don't want to grow up, the responsibility, it's scary. I did feel a little bit like nervousness at that time in my life, right? Because it's like, what am I going to do? Those kind of things. And I had gotten good at school. I knew how to pass tests. I knew how to study. So like, I was good at it, right? It came easy for me. So we ended up starting Beta Bay Properties 6 months before I graduated, literally because I told my business partner, Jerome, I said, we met when we were 14 years old at high school. I'm like, hey man, I just learned what an LLC was. He's like, okay. And I go, we were doing little summer jobs with my grandfather, fixing up houses, stuff like that. And he goes, well, my dad was a contractor. His dad passed when we were young. And he's like, so why don't we try start a little company? I'm like, all right, I just learned how to do it. So a buddy of mine was flipping a house in St. Pete. We're like, hey, we'll do it for free. We'll split the profits. Okay.
This is like 2003, 4.
It's like 03. Yeah, 03. We made $1,200 on the job, put in hours upon hours upon hours. So probably made like $1 an hour or something like that. Crazy. And then we ended up getting another fix and flip that we kind of helped. And then we ended up going into a condo tower that people started bringing folks to us. And
did you need a license back then? Like, did you need
yes. Did I know that? No. So we ended up, oh crap, we need a license because you can't consistently do this without permits. You got to do it the right way. And so that's just kind of how it happened. And I remember one time, this was 04 now, so I was 24. And I asked Jerome, I said, hey man, do you know how to build a house? And he's like, yeah. He was lying to me because he didn't really know how to build a house. But he goes, yeah. And I go, okay. So I begged my mom, like, hey, can I borrow 75 grand? I'll pay you 6% interest. And she goes, okay. And I think back to that now. It's like, it's kind of funny that she just did that, which I appreciate.
Yeah.
And so we built the house, and a month or two before it was finished, someone wanted to buy it. And within weeks after that, someone said, hey, will you build my house as well? And so honestly, that's just how it started. We started building houses.
That first home, that was a spec home, right?
It was a spec home, yeah. We were sitting at the closing table, and the guy, he looked at Jerome and I. We were both there because we both had to sign on. And he's like, how old are you guys? We were like 24. Like, how many houses have you built? Not that many, but this is a good house. And yeah, so that's a true story, how that kind of happened. And that's what we did. So
you bought the lot. Do you remember the numbers? I mean, what'd you buy the lot for?
75 grand was a lot-ish. I think maybe 67, 74, 75, something like that. I want to say the construction costs were like 120.
Okay.
Right. So what is that? 170, like
almost 2.
And then I think we sold it for like 295, maybe 300.
So pretty good.
Yeah. So, we did a lot. We self-performed a lot, so we didn't sub everything out.
Was that kind of at that closing table when you guys got that check or wire? Was that like, oh shit, like this is a pretty lucrative business here?
Yeah. I mean, it was the most money we've ever got in our life. Before that, on some of the stuff, I mean, my first year in business, I remember my tax return was $7,000, $7,800.
$7,800. Wow.
Yeah. Next year was like $26,000. And so again, I was fortunate that I didn't have certain responsibilities that required me to make a certain amount of money to like survive and live. And we were just hustlers, man. Like,
yeah.
We woke up at 5, 6 a.m. We worked out every single day together, drank lots of water, ate lots of chicken, no carbs. Like, we were like those guys. And so I think our parents saw that. So they were willing to kind of like let us live at home a little bit longer.
Right.
Because we weren't like, just loafing. We were putting in a lot of effort.
Yeah.
And then, we hoarded some of the money too, because we didn't need it. So we weren't big spenders. And, then the recession hit in call it 07. Mm-hmm. We had a handful of houses under construction, but if I didn't read the news articles, I don't know if I would have really known what was going on, because we were just fulfilling some of our project. We didn't have any overhead. And we had saved, a little bit of money in the bank. So there was some cushion there.
And no debt at that time?
Zero debt.
Yep. Wow. So you guys kind of weathered that storm. Was there a moment, being so young and being in a partnership, that you thought, oh shit, like this could be the end of us? Or were you very comfortable through the whole recession?
We were very comfortable. You got to remember, like, comfort's a little bit relative, right? Like, we hadn't really put ourselves out there, meaning there wasn't a lot of debt. There wasn't a lot of responsibility. So like,
the risk was low.
What are you really worried about? If you got a few $100,000 in the bank, you only need 30 grand a year to live. Like, so there wasn't, I don't want to come off like, we weathered it. Like, we got through it. It existed
because of your particular situation, mostly.
And I think we were very prudent. The second we made some money, we didn't go buy boats and cars. We kind of still struggled through it, and use that money as kind of like work in progress, and use that to kind of fund what we needed, just from a construction standpoint. So I think it was like around 06, actually, we opened up, I'll never forget, it was like this, I don't remember what article it was, but it was like the top 100 builders in Florida based off of volume, right? And we started 6 houses in 1 quarter. So we were number 96. I didn't even know that. And then I read it. I'm like, oh, wow. Like, and that was just interesting, right? But we weren't making a lot of money per house, but we started doing a lot. One time, Jerome and I, when we were just by ourselves, we had 11 houses under construction.
That's a lot.
It was a lot.
And you were 27, 28. This is during the recession or right after, maybe 08, 09. So you've been in business like maybe 5 years or so.
Yep.
That's a pretty steep climb.
Yeah. In hindsight, yes.
Just real quick, like today's perspective versus looking back, do you think that Is that possible for a 24-year-old today, given construction prices, land prices, how competitive the market is? It was kind of a different world 20 years ago in Florida versus today.
Yeah, it was, I don't know. I mean, if you're going to build spec houses, right, there's different capital requirements, especially in the Tampa Bay area than there were 20 years ago. I get it, the cost of money and time value money, but I just think it's different now. But again, I mean, I know you had David Clemens on, right? And, he's kind of put the pieces of the puzzle together. I think he's only 29, 30 years old. And I think there's a lot of, he's doing it more with the fix and flips and things like that. I know he's a hard money guy as well, but he does have that fix and flip business. And so I think there are pockets and opportunities. I think, a guy told me once, when you're in your 20s, you just got to learn. When you're in your 30s, you kind of figure out what you're good at. And when you're in your 40s, you make money. And whether that's exactly perfect for you or somebody else, I think that there is kind of like a little bit of what I would just say, like, that's where your mind should be, right? So in my 20s, we were learning what we were supposed to do, what we weren't. The difference between me and maybe a couple other guys is that every mistake we made cost us money. So it was like ingrained into my head more not to make those mistakes potentially, right? Because it was our own money and there wasn't like a company that lost money that felt abstract to me. So in general, I would say that we got better and we matured. And then also, from a discipline standpoint, I would encourage you, me, others that are listening to this is like, what are you doing with your free time? What are you doing to make yourself better every single day? What environment are you putting yourself in? Who are the 5 people that you talk to on a regular basis that are either a good influence or an average influence? And so those were all things that maybe just because of my personality, but we were very conscientious of and thinking through. And I think we got a little bit lucky.
To find each other
And to find opportunities. Because I'll never forget, like when we were in our 20s, the biggest battle was like, you're so young. Like how many of these, like if I tell you that I'm going to build a car wash, right? Hey, I can build a car wash for you because we build a lot of them right now. When you hear that I've got
there's a lot going up around town. It's kind of crazy, but
we're probably building half of them at least.
Yeah.
When I tell you I've got 15 under construction, your response back is, do you know what you're doing? Right? You just assume I know what I'm doing because I'm doing 15 other ones. It's probably more than you're doing.
Right.
But when you're a 26-year-old guy and you say, I want to build your house, the first question that someone's going to ask is, well, how many houses have you built? So when the truth is I've built one, how do you combat that? And how do you get somebody to give you $300,000? And that's difficult. If it's spec, now I got to at least convince an investor, or if it's my money or my parents' money or anybody's money. So I just think in general, it's morphed for me where in our 20s we were young. Are you qualified? To now at times I'm trying. It's like a catch-22. Sometimes I want to be perceived that we're small enough so that we still are a boutique firm that can handle everything. We're not too big for our britches. And then when you're negotiating with Walmart, right, they want to know that you can work in 6 states and you've got the wherewithal. And so you want to be bigger. And so, I mean, the truth is the truth. I believe in being authentic. And so I want to tell people the truth because I'd rather deal with that than embellish. But I'm just trying to say in the history of the 20 years, you're small, acting like you're big. Then you get a little big or medium and you're trying to act like you're small. So you're kind of like always in this little identity crisis. Where now, and I would say this in life as well, you hit 40 and you kind of don't care. Like I don't care what people think as much anymore.
Do you think it just takes time to kind of realize that?
Honestly, I think it's maturity.
Which takes time.
Yes. So yes.
Yeah. I think a lot of people when they're in their 20s, they have extremely high ambitions. And I know you're an ambitious guy. You're a fast talker. Like you're on it. Kind of going back to that time period, when you had 11 houses at a time and you guys are doing pretty well. I think a big part of it is because you had a great partner. I think that's amazing that you had an awesome partner and a good relationship. Was his personality like yours? Was he super ambitious? Like how did you guys bring different things to the table, combine them, and then like move in a direction?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think, and I would say this even like our team now, right? But to answer your question specifically on Jerome, I would say that we had very similar values, right? In terms of like maybe vision, thought process, respect, professionalism, those kind of buzzwords that actually mean something. But the truth is that we were polar opposite, which was great, right? Because what he was good at, I wasn't. And what I was good at, he wasn't. So I would say that's the definition of a good partnership, right? You put yourself together and now you're good at more things. And so again, I think I like the book Traction, where it goes back to the right people in the right seats. It's kind of the same thing now, right? So we have, every business has a sales team, a sales and marketing department or initiatives, business development, estimating or proposals, operations, finance, compliance. And so I'm completely lying to you if I say I'm good at all of those. Like I'm better at certain portions of those than I am at others. And so what we really want is, as a team, whether it's a partnership with a guy or it's a team in general, we want the team leader in that department to be the best. And then they need to be respected and they need to be professional. And like, that's why you have, pods, or you have directors, or you have presidents or VPs of certain sections. And then I think it goes back to like the working with Joe, right? Is like, I don't have all the context on the finance compliance. And oh, by the way, there's like 10 people in my office better than me. So I don't care that like I did something when I was 23, right? That like I don't get to trump what they're saying, because I respect them enough to whatever they say is the answer. Unless they're just completely wrong and we need to talk through it. Like I'm not saying that, but we're pretty good and we've got checklists and certain things. So I think to me, it comes back to respect and the right people, and then the true teamwork. I think about like, I don't know, Tom Brady in the Bucs. If Tom Brady wanted to be any other position than quarterback, he's probably not in the NFL. He's probably not even on a D1 college team. I don't even know if he'd make a high school team at another position. So Tom Brady, you can say, well, he's a great leader. There's tons of attributes that we all respect about him. But I think if he was sitting here, he'd say like, yeah, I'm good at being a quarterback. I'm not good at being other things. And so I think we all need to realize what we're good at, get on the right team, and then put ourselves in the right role. So I think it starts with guys like me saying what I'm not good at, or why I shouldn't be in the room on that conversation, or why I should deflect to certain individuals in the organization that are better than me, and what they say is the final answer, not what I say.
Was there a realization of that, kind of back to that recession period? You guys have, a little bit of savings, you have a partnership, you have 11 homes going on. You guys probably felt like, hey, we're doing pretty well. Where did it shift to 70 employees? At that time back then, did you have any actual employees?
Yeah, so I don't remember exactly, but I want to, let's just say fairly accurate, like between 07 and 09, we probably had less than between 3 and 5 employees, and Jerome and I. Right?
Were you scared to hire that first employee?
Oh, yeah. How do you pay for them? What does payroll mean? You're
That's
nervous.
where I'm at.
Yeah.
In my business is like, I could probably afford a full-time position. I mean, Tyler's with the company. He helps me out. He's paid, but I'm talking about more of like a managerial high salary position, but it's a scary thought. It's like, especially in what I do, real estate commissions, there's no necessarily cash flow. It's real estate commissions. We only get paid if a deal closes. Sometimes deals don't close. We're very, beholden to the market. It's just a little bit of a scary thing. How did you guys kind of break past that?
Yeah. So, again, I think you want to have a little bit of a cushion and a runway to be able to, make a big boy decision and kind of like, hey, this is for the betterment of our vision, our purpose. You also kind of are going to assess that you don't have the ability to do everything. You also probably care about being balanced. So, I don't really respect a lot of guys that tell me they work 60 hours a week. Like, I'm like, you're an idiot.
Yeah.
Like, why do you do that much? Right. So you're out of balance. And so I think, that was a bragocious comment most of the time. Like, I work 60 hours a week. It's like, that's not sustainable. Right. I've worked 60 hours a week, and that was like not fun. And your wife doesn't like that. And you're not a good husband. You're not a good father, all those things. So I'm a big believer in like being really efficient and being balanced. So I think, you guys sit there and say, okay, if I'm working 80 hours a week, if I've got X amount in the bank, and if I can bring somebody in and I can get value out of them, right? And however value you define value. And then also you can sustain it, and you see a runway. I like to think in terms of 3 years. Like, if we're hiring anybody, I want to be very confident that I can keep them employed for 3 years at a minimum, right? And once you kind of do that, then it's just like, go. And don't overthink, and don't have too much paralysis of analysis, right? We have a huge payroll. I mean, I don't even know. I think
I would imagine,
over 500,000, goes out a month. And so like right now, even just saying that out loud, you think about it and it's like, oh crap.
Right.
Like, that's not a good feeling. Like, start sweating a little bit.
No,
right?
seriously. Yeah.
And then, but at the same time, it's like, well, we know that What are they doing? Is it high value? Are we efficient? I know I can't do 100 hours a week or 80 hours a week. I know that's not scalable. I know that's not sustainable. That's not what our VTO, vision tracker, organizer, and traction, that's kind of like a good model. It's like contrary to all of that. So I think if you say you want to grow, right, you don't have to grow with employees, but I think that, what does grow mean? How do you define that? How do you write it out? And then once you, there's this acronym that I like using a lot. It's like ISEO, right? So first you identify the problem you want to grow, right? Or you're working too much or whatever it is. What's your strategy? So you map out a strategy. And then once you get through the first I and the strategy, now it's just a function of, are you disciplined enough and will you go execute on it? And then the O is the outcome, right? So the outcome happens based off the execution. So for me, what I've gotten pretty diligent at is identifying the problem, creating a strategy, and then just going and execute on it. Like you're running a marathon. You're not sprinting a marathon, you're running a marathon. And it's sustainable, it's scalable. I can do it for a long time. I don't overthink it. And so I'm just very disciplined to do that. And then, cross your fingers and a little bit of luck and a few other things fall into place, right. and you can make a good story every now and then.
I would imagine there's a thought too of, and I'm not in this boat, but there's a lot of businesses, there's a lot of guys that own companies. You may have thought this too when you guys were young. We're making, we're doing 11 homes at a time. We're making some good money, just you and I. Let's just keep it up. We got a good thing going. We're making plenty of dough. Like, why do we need to add another person to be responsible for?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my quick answer back to that would be like bigger is not always better, right? And when I say better, I don't know, right? It's like if there's the ego side, then people want to be big because you want to revenue, and right? It's like, who cares about revenue? Like I care about net income.
Exactly.
Right? Like who cares if you're doing 100 million if you made $1 million when you really should have made 10 million? And if I could have made more doing 30 million, then right. So the best way I can describe it is that there's this thought process. I think it was a book that I read. It's called like In the Middle. And what that means is that you make money when you're small and you make money when you're big. And when you're in the middle, you need to recognize you're in the middle and you need to get out as quickly as possible. And I'm agnostic, either get big or get small. So you're not making as much money when you're in the middle. You make money when you're big or when you're small. So here's an example. I had an electrician that said, man, I used to have a crew of 10 and I was killing it. I was doing great. I was confident. I felt good about everything. Now I got a group of 40 and I'm making less money than when I had a guy with 10. And I go, so are you going to go get to 70 or are you going to go back to 10? And he was like, well, what do you, he was like stuck a little bit. And again, I would say, again, through maturity, you can kind of get there, right? Like, I think guys that decide to go small, I almost admire more than the guys that desire to go big, because that is a good, sound decision. And it can check a lot of boxes in terms of what your life goals are.
You can make a great life, yeah.
Yeah. And I think there's more companies. There's another quote that says more companies die of indigestion than starvation. We have that as when we have our new contract goals every single year that we put together. That's a slogan that we have on our front page of that cover sheet. And the reason we do that is that it helps us, it reminds us that we need to say no more than we say yes. So I think when we're talking about being in the middle or maybe getting big, you think you need more work to get big, which kind of makes sense, right? But the truth is that if you say yes too much, you'll make less money. And if you say no more, you'll make more money. So I think guys need to start realizing they need to say no, because that's healthier. We had an example of a mason that he was doing really good. He was on 2 or 3 projects and he was killing it for us. And we were hitting schedules. He was making money. We were doing well. So it was like, great. Next thing you know, we have him on 6 projects, right? And he starts failing at a couple. And basically he started failing at all 6. So we had to swap him out. He lost a bunch of money, basically went out of business, all because he said yes to those other 3. His capacity was 3. He went to 6. He failed at all 6 and he was crushing it when he was doing 3. And I'm like, man, if you just said no, you would have been fine. And I respect guys that say no, because I don't want that, right? We always want people that have capacity because we care about the performance. It's kind of like phantom money, right? In the beginning, I signed all these contracts. It's like, who cares? What at the end of the day, how much actually hit your bank account in a wire that you held on to? That's what really matters, right? So moral of the story, I think, is everybody, including myself, needs to say no a little more than we say yes, in my opinion.
And then how did you guys go from building 11 homes at a time? It sounds like kind of at this part of the, the growth of the company, you guys are doing spec homes exclusively. How did you shift from that to car washes and beyond?
Yeah. So we were doing, out of those 11, we were probably doing like 80% were spec homes. A few of them were custom. So we did start doing some custom houses as well up till about, I think it was 2011 or 2012. In 2009, we started getting into, we did a deal. A guy named John came into our firm, and he's like, hey, I've got a Dollar General on the East Coast. It was in Palm Bay. And we're like, oh crap, how do we manage it from that far away? Because we were used to everything being within 30 miles of us. So we hire a superintendent, we do that deal. We did a decent job. We didn't make a ton of money, but then the developer wanted us to do 2 more. So so fast forward like 4 or 5 years from there, and we ended up doing like well over probably, I don't even know, 70, 80, $90 stores during a 5-year period. Wow. And that's when we actually grew.
And right? You were, and this was only a few years kind of after that point. So you were maybe 31, 32, 33.
I was 30, yep. So call that 2009 to probably 2000, call it even 2008 to 2013, 14 was like our dollar store run, right? Family Dollar, Dollar General. One interesting thing, Kate Rogers, who's our COO now, she's a stud. And in 2000, I can't remember exactly what it said, call it 2011, 2012, when she came on board, we were sitting around the table with Jerome, myself, and her. She's like, hey guys, I don't think we should grow this year. And I was like, oh, really? Again, going back to the let's say no a little bit more. I was like, yeah, but we did 20 million in sales. I think we could do like 30 million. And she's like, no, this is like almost like a crash and burn scenario. We're going to get too big for our britches. We're not going to be able to do it.
Like the Mason.
Yeah. We can't service our customer properly. We don't have the correct foundation in place. And, we're kind of like, yeah, we do. Anyways. So we all agreed with her and basically said, okay, we're not going to grow this year. So that year, I think it was 2013 to 2014, actually. So 2014, we did basically 400 grand more in sales. So we did like 20 million and 20 million, 400, something like that. But what we did that year was we built the infrastructure. We got a project management software system called Procore. We were like the 400th user. They're a public company now. And that helped build like what I'll call the SOPs of the business. So like on paper, we were confident and we knew how we could scale at that point, almost like a business plan to scale, right? And so that would probably be if you said, hey, what was that pivotal moment that you went from being like a couple guys that did 11 houses and good job, started doing some dollar stores and it was interesting. Like we really became what I would call be a real company right around there. And I think that was like a very contrarian type perspective that I had because I wanted to grow. I think I applaud her because without saying it, she was basically saying, yeah, but we need to grow the right way. And we need to grow in a way that's sustainable and scalable. And like we can do it for a decade or 2 decades or 3 decades, not like have a good 3-year run and then we're overwhelmed kind of thing. So that's what happened. And looking back, that did provide the foundation to then be able to build on. So that was probably like one of the best decisions that the company ended up making because of her comment on that. And I'll say, to give her credit again, the second best thing was right before COVID, she said, why do you like construction? She said to Jerome and I, and John was in the room too. And I couldn't really answer it. Jerome answered it in the way he answered it, which is, his father did it. And he's very much like a technical wizard type guy, does all the estimating, very analytical. And I think she said, well, if you could run silt fence, which is just like the black thing on the side of the road that holds back the construction earth, that kind of thing, right? It's called silt fence erosion control. If you could do that from here to Maine and make more money than what we're doing now, would you do it? Yes or no? And instantly I was like, yes. So I think that was her way of saying like, well, how intrigued by construction are you? Do you just care about the right process and making money? And so what happened there was it allowed us to focus a little bit more on what are we good at instead of trying to be a smorgasbord and be good at everything. We were able to start hyper-focusing on certain profiles that we thought we could be really good at. So right now, to go full circle to who's Bay to Bay, right now we do car washes, fuel stations, self-storage facilities, and multi-tenant strip retail shelves. Our stretch is build to rent. That's it. So if you ask me to build a Chipotle, which 5 guys have asked me in the last 60 days, the answer is respectfully no. Starbucks, not anymore. Banks, no thanks. Aspen Dental, built 6 of them, but no more. Why? Because I can't be an expert at everything, right? We got to be good at what we're good at. And so we can get really good at those profiles once we put energy and effort into it. So like, I'd rather be laser focused on those profiles and then go run all the way as far as we can, to use an analogy, to Maine, right? Instead of trying to be everybody's everything. So I would say the same thing maybe to you, right? What is your niche in the realtor world? Do you need a niche? Are you going to take a $100,000 listing, a $500,000 listing, a $5 million listing, a $50 million? How many are there? Where can you prospect? I would say the word that we use a lot in the office is being intentional and intentionality. So I think being intentional, I think has served us well. And it also gives us that credit and that expertise that when we're talking to others about those profiles, we know what we're saying and we're good and our numbers are accurate. So people can rely on us more. And that's what keeps them coming back.
I think there's a sense on my side, kind of where I'm at is, you kind of, in the beginning, for me, I've always wanted to have a real estate company that serves almost every purpose. I want to be able to have my licensees help someone buy a house, sell a house, buy or sell investment property, represent a builder, developer, sell out projects, stuff like that, do everything. But I think you kind of do have to chase that silt line down to Maine first and get good at least a couple avenues before you can expand into other ones. Do you guys ever sit there and think, well, we've been asked to build all these Chipotles, why don't we create a different division, and then certain people can be experts on that and we can build that part of the business out? I mean, isn't that truly the way to scale, is to have a wider net of available services for your customers?
Yeah, I'd say the short answer is yes, from a philosophical standpoint. I think that what you start running into, though, is constraints, right? So I could make an argument that why don't we have a quick service restaurant division? Why don't we have a bank division? Why don't we have a grocery store division? Why don't we have an industrial division? We run around saying we do commercial construction, and that means like everything, right? Mm-hmm. And so I'm in a peer group that's got 5 different general contractors from all over the country, and they're all pretty successful. They're all kind of between $80 and $200 million a year in sales. And what I've learned through them is that they have a niche. So one guy deals with hospitality. One guy deals with medical. One guy does like K1 through 12, right? Another guy will do student housing. We'll do retail. Another guy will do multifamily. Very rarely do I see companies that could say, I do all of that. At some level, it's construction, right? So there are some like carryovers.
Well, just like real estate. You have a real estate license. You can help someone buy or sell a house or investment property, whatever it is.
Right. But I would have to believe that, selling a new construction home in a community for Lennar or D.R. Horton or somebody like that is a little different than selling, a house on Culperth Isle.
Of course.
Right. And so, I would just urge you, and if it's easier than what I'm saying, because maybe where there's different industries, which is fine, are you perceived as the expert at anything? And if you are, okay. If you're not, like, how can you be an expert at everything? And I don't think I find it very difficult to do that. So what we've said is, like, we know we can be an expert at car wash, self-storage, fuel, and then and multi-tenant strip retail. When we start saying a bunch of other things like the banks and all the other examples I gave you, we're good at it. We can complete it. I'm confident. I'm not worried. But at the same time, like, is my team members as confident? Like, are they going to be, do they know certain things in their head that they can do it at we call it legendary level, right? So it's like 9 out of 10 all the time without learning curves and predictability. So it's all like, there's all these variables that matter, is time, energy, expertise, confidence. And again, I have seen that the more successful companies, they seem to be niche, however you define that. And I realize that's a blanket statement, but they seem to be really good at certain things. I don't know that many companies that I can point as an example that are good at everything. Mm-hmm. Like Amazon sells everything, but they're really good at aggregating people to go to one site, and they're unbelievable at logistics.
Right. Which is kind of one thing.
Right.
Different products, but it really is one thing.
And then they're sitting there saying, and I don't know enough about it to keep the conversation going, but then also their cloud computing business, right? So it's like, okay, so those are your verticals. But again, we were talking to David Clements, who's a mutual friend of ours. We all are thinking through ways to vertically integrate as well. So I don't take me wrong. Like, I think there are certain things that we can do to bolt on that once you become an expert at something, well, we could bolt on certain businesses or people or self-performing or certain attributes that are easy bolt-ons that make a lot of sense, that have a lot of value to the customer, right? But they make sense and they're not stretching you too thin, and it is scalable and it is sustainable.
Maybe the reason I think that way right now in the beginning is because I don't want to say no to an opportunity. Like I wouldn't want to meet a developer who's building a 15-unit townhome project in South Tampa. Oh, we can't serve it. We don't do that. Mm-hmm. I think that's why.
So I was you, right? And I think that what you'll learn is that once the sample size is large enough and you're actually get really good at a certain thing and it fulfills you, right? And it keeps your engine going and there's consistency in terms of output from the organization, not just you. You'll be able to say no easier. And then what I would also encourage you to think through is that in those situations, right, there's like easy no's and there's hard no's. Like if I said, hey, would you sell a Publix in Tallahassee for me? What would you say?
We'll try to make it happen.
Right. And so, but then the next question would be like, are you even good at that? Do you know what the cap rates are?
Never done it before. Right. Have no idea.
Who are the 300 people you're going to email that say, hey, here's a good deal. Here's why. What's the ingress, egress, right in, right out. Here's the light. Here's the house. Like it's a totally different sale than selling a $3 million house in Beach Park. Yeah. Right. And so again, I'm not being judgmental and saying you should or shouldn't. And I'm not even saying that you should or shouldn't like add on or bolt on but there's some things the Publix in Tallahassee is an easy example of what I would expect someone to say, no, I'm not qualified to do it. I don't know. I can't service you the best. You might be willing, right? But you kind of want to just morph into, what are you good at? Where are you high value? And I just think it's not everything. So I think restaurants are another good example, right? Like what restaurant do you know that literally serves every cuisine?
It's a good question, yeah.
And your answer is like, oh, the food court. Okay, well, that's a food court that has
Applebee's, maybe.
Applebee's, right? And so then it's like, well, what's the perception of Applebee's in the marketplace?
Garbage.
I don't know, right? Like,
yeah,
maybe not garbage, but maybe right. Like, if you said to your wife, "Hey, I want to go get the best steak in town," are you going to Applebee's?
Of course not. No.
What about the best Italian cuisine? Probably not, right? Even the best salad. Like, I don't even know if you would ever go to Applebee's for the best X. So you would go. Now, if you're going to get the best steak, you're probably going to Burns. If you're going, or Charlie's or Ruth Chris and I would just say like, what companies can end up making the most amount of money, and the ones that have a niche and a focus and are intentional, they're actually really good. They actually provide very good service offerings. And it also has a very fulfilling type thing. Because remember, go back to your employees will be appreciated. Most people that I know, when they say that they like something, like they're happy, it's usually because they're good at it. Very rarely have I ever met anybody that plays a sport that they're shitty at, that runs around saying they're good at it, unless they're like 5 years old and they're just happy to be outside and get oranges at the end or something, right? So I think it's the same premise. And I think my bullet point on that is like, I would encourage everybody to be as intentional as possible, at least consider it, think through it, and it'll make you better in your thought process.
There's a little bit of a scarcity mindset too. When you're out there in the marketplace, I'll do anything. I'll take anything. Sure, we'll try it. It's kind of a bad vibe to the customer in a lot of ways. They want someone who can confidently say, no, we don't do that sort of thing. But I can certainly try to find someone who could, or refer you or whatever. I think it's more almost powerful in a way to have that type of a mindset.
I would fully agree. And I fully agree as well with the scarcity mindset. I think, I would encourage you and me and others to just not have a scarcity mindset until maybe you have to, right? Like, meaning if I'm going to say self-storage, car wash, fuel, and multi-tenant strip centers are my thing, and then I'm turning down 20 projects a quarter. That does feel weird for me even right now, even though I'm actually very good at like, what if I need them? What if in 6 months from now? What if I burn a bridge, right? So my thought process is maybe I can go kind of source a few people that can help them on that category, right? That I can refer. And I can kind of stay in the game a little bit in case I need them again in 6 months from now. But at the same time, I'm doing myself, my team, and everybody a disservice if I'm not focused and laser focused on those profiles. And I deserve it to the team to, just because people are calling me asking for that, I need to be more intentional. Until I know that there's no car wash market, no storage market, no fuel station market, it's not fair for me to just go take everything, because the experience is different. And it's very difficult to have project managers and superintendents work on, one day they're working on let's say a 300 unit apartment complex. And the next day they're building a Burger King. Like that's kind of different. That's different construction, different things happen, different variables. And so now I'm almost putting my team in a position that they can't be as successful as if I was more consistent with them.
And then of course you're risking reputation, brand, all that sort of stuff, service, quality reduces. Kind of going back to your Dollar General, right? Like you mentioned that you guys have built $70, $80 Generals. Is that a part of what you're an expert in? You mentioned car wash, multi-tenant strip center, stuff like that. So you wouldn't say that's what you do now. You guys don't do that anymore?
Yeah. So, what happened in that world is that, again, as you mature, you get better, right? The profit margin in that particular sector was not as good as the opportunity cost in others for us.
Got it.
So it was, so we made a shift, and that's, if you heard me say, so I talked about the 4 profiles, and we also talk about stretch. So our stretch profile right now this year is built to rent. Right. So we're willing to do some build to rent projects. We're working on one right now in Ocala. It's 190 units. And so we do that to stretch ourselves because, like, what's the next thing? Right. What's the next profile? And so for us, we want to make sure that, again, we only have the capacity to run at probably 50 projects a year. So I have to run at the most profitable, best ones that I can be consistent, that I can have a good reputation, and that our team can do the same thing. So it's morphed, right? So we actually have profile meetings every quarter. We also have stretch initiatives. And so in those stretch, we kind of like, that could be a profile again going next year or the year after. And maybe one of our profiles right now could fall off, like fuel, right? Like I don't know what's going to happen with EV and all these other things. And so we're constantly watching to see if a profile needs to fall off and if a new one needs to come on, so that we're evolving as well. That way it's not myopic. And we're not just saying those are the only thing we'll do forever.
Right.
And the dollar store is a great example.
Right, exactly. Yeah, because if someone came to you and said, hey, have you guys ever built those, or are you guys experts? Well, yeah, you've built a lot of them. You know exactly what you're doing. It's just not a part of your business model currently.
Correct. Yep. So another way, like let's say your business, right? Let's say you have the capacity to sell, I don't know, make it up, 50 houses a year, right? At some level, you want to serve everybody. But at another level, don't you also want the best 50 that meet certain thresholds and qualify properly and like are in a certain location? Like you don't want them all in Orlando, would be my guess. You want them to be in Tampa, right? Mm-hmm. So I think there's the opportunity cost of capital is a very, common term when people are making investment decisions. I think it's also the opportunity cost of time, right? And then also you have to remember you've got constraints. And so you've only got a certain number of project managers, a certain number of superintendents, a certain number of realtors. And so you can't do everything, because if your capacity is 50, but I bring in 100 projects, I'm guessing everybody's pissed and overworked and their home life isn't good. And like, they're probably jumping ship to somebody else.
Well, the Mason story was perfect.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, if you take on too much, it's going to be detrimental to what you already have going on. I think that was a super, super important story. When you watched that happen, was that a realization point for you? Like, oh my gosh, that's kind of a lesson for us as a company.
Definitely. So what we did as a result of that is we were more intentional in the way that we looked at how many projects are we giving certain subcontractors. And then also making sure that we're having conversations with subcontractors about their capacity. Our director of operations right now, he's constantly saying things to us like, hey, we've got that plumber on 6 projects. Let's make sure that we're kind of making, is that good? Is that not good? Can he handle it? So he's getting concerned because he doesn't want to have a failure, and now we got to get into cleanup mode. So yeah, I would say that was definitely a lesson, and we needed to make some adjustments to make sure that we're also not just allowing that to happen to us. Like, we're in control. We know how to, divvy them up, and we want the guys to be successful. We want our subs to be successful. We want them to make money. And that's how we get the A crew, and that's how they keep coming back, and that's why they want to work with Beta Bay.
Getting rid of people, kind of going back to the beginning. Was there a moment that you had to kind of let people go, fire people? Was there anything ugly that happened that was a major shift when you guys were kind of growing those first few years?
Yeah, no. So I think we were fortunate in that regard. If anything, we probably were a little bit like you are, where we said yes too much. So there was like a little bit of, we were stretched too thin. Mm-hmm. But at that time in our life, we were working 60, 70 hours. So we were almost like solving that problem through extra effort, right? So it's almost like we could have hired more people and we didn't. And then, but that was also like a burnout scenario, right? Like you can't do that forever type thing. You know, the only other thing I would say, like, you know, when COVID hit, I believe it was like March 18th or something, like whatever that Monday was. And I just remember like that was a very unsettling feeling because, you know, we dried up, like our contracts dried up 6 months. Like we were used to signing up, call it minimum, you know, $7-8 million a month in new work. And for 5 months there, we signed up 4 million total. So, I mean, that was before even PPP and all this kind of stuff. Right. So we're sitting there like, what do? We want to make sure we hoard our cash a little bit, right? So we did ask everybody, hey, we need to take a haircut. Everybody needs a 10% haircut. We're sorry, but we need to do that because we think it's in the best interest of the business, including ourselves. So we all did that. We were fortunate with PPP kind of came back, and so we were able to give that money back to the team. But that was probably like the hardest thing to do in terms of just employees and personnel, because you care so much about them. But I mean, that wasn't just us, right? That was like a unique experience that everybody is dealing with that. And at that time, if you remember, DeSantis did not open everything up right away. So things were getting shut down. We were considered essential, but projects were starting to slip. And, you know, in the last, and what happened to us from a business standpoint is the couple years following that, so 2020, 2021, and probably like until the fall of 2022, you know, inflation just crushed us. And it wasn't funny at all. And the whole thing, I mean, I want to throw up when someone says, oh, just pass it along to the customer. Like, it's not as easy as it sounds. And so that was just very difficult. And on top of just inflation, the supply chain management issues and logistics, we couldn't get material. So schedules are slipping. So we used to be able to build a 7-Eleven in 120 days. And in 2021, 2022, it's well over 240.
Wow.
And you're just like, no one wants to pay extra for that, but you're waiting for refrigeration equipment to come in. We're waiting on all of the equipment to hook everything up. You're waiting for sinks. You're waiting for electrical switchgear. You're waiting for the RTUs. I mean, complete mess.
Yeah, so, that was a huge issue with trusses in the single-family home, you know, obviously residential sector.
So you'll like this story. We were building a couple spec houses. So I do that on the side a little bit. We built a couple spec houses in Crystal Beach. And it was cheaper for us to go to North Georgia, Rome, Georgia, and buy trusses and ship them down here than it was to get trusses off US 19 from Builder Source.
Rome, Georgia. I've got a baby dude next month, and his name is Rome.
Nice.
That's funny. How do you kind of, thank you, moving into that, like the personal life, you have such an amazing business, man. I mean, you've been super successful. Obviously, you guys are ambitious, and your vision's probably more than what you're doing now, of course. But how did you go from being that 24-year-old, you're making some money, you got this business going, well, now you have obviously a family and children. Like, how do you kind of balance those two things? Because that's something I'm going to have to deal with in the next 6 weeks.
Yeah. Well, I guess I'll share my perspective. My wife might differ from my opinion, but I think the answer is that, you know, it goes back to what we said, like you have to have equilibrium. I would argue that in almost anything, but you have to have that balance. And so, you know, it is important, and you don't want things that are important to you to fall off, right? So your children and being engaged in their lives, your wife and taking time. And so, you know, it's a constant battle for me. Because I do have a little bit of like that workaholic tendency. Like I'm very comfortable in the office. Like I want to go, right? Like I'm never like,
it's fun for you. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's also, maybe it's just like habit, right? But I felt bad. You know, my wife said, she's like, hey, even when you're home, I feel like you're disengaged at times. Like, you know, going back, and I'm like, oh crap. Like, is she right? And the truth is that she is right. Cause I might be playing with the little 5-year-old, but in my head, I'm like, you know, doing an email real quick. And so I think a lot of it is just slowing down and realizing what's important, maturing, and realizing, you know, health matters a lot. Energy matters a lot. And again, I would go back to like, we really all should be working. The max you could probably convince me is like 50 hours a week when you have a family and that kind of thing, right? So really the question is how do you do the most in that 50 hours? Right?
And what is work too, right? It's like, you know, are you working if you're playing with your kid and you're on the email? Or right now, is this work for you?
Right.
You know what I mean? What exactly is work? You don't punch a clock. We don't punch a clock. You know, that's not what we do. So how do you define what is work and what isn't work?
Yeah, I probably I don't even know if I can answer that. Like I don't know if I even know what that means. Like I intellectually know what it means because
Right.
yeah, I agree with you. And like, is this work? Right, we're talking and it's fun and that
Right.
kind of thing. I think for me it just turns into where am I spending my time? Right. So if I'm spending my time on this, it's not myself, the kids, the family, and that kind of thing. And so like that's okay. I think that that's healthy. But I just need to make sure that I am spending time there as well. And so, and I think it's also okay to fall out of balance. Okay, so you were out of balance this week. You had to work more than you wanted to for whatever reason. All right, what are you going to do to recover and make up for it? Maybe you spend a little extra quality time with your kid on a Sunday, or you get home at 4 o'clock on a Monday instead of 5 or 5:30 or something like that. I did pretty good at, I coached, I was a soccer player. I had no clue about baseball. So I started coaching their baseball team, right? So I'm watching YouTube videos on how to teach little kids how to be a baseball player and stuff like that. But, so the kids saw me as the coach for 3 seasons. And so I try to do what I can to stay engaged on that front. And then I would also say, like, I think you'll figure this out more when you get a little bit older, but how important health is.
Yeah.
Right. And so like, I think certain disciplines and things that you're doing, like I used to feel bad if I had to work out and it was like during a certain time period. Now I don't. Like I like going into the office.
God, I
early.
felt that way so hardcore over just over the past, really just the past few years. I mean, I've taken on a lot more responsibility. We've got just under 30 licensees, and here in Tampa alone, 15 in the last 10 months. We've really been growing here. And on certain days, for whatever reason, whether it's me waking up early in the morning and then immediately hitting the emails and the computer, and then it's 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, and it's like, I need to work out. And then I go work out. Well, 9 a.m., you go to the gym, phone's blowing up. I'm sitting there on the bench press on a phone call. Like, I'm like, what am I doing at the gym? Like, what the? And then I leave the gym and it's like my whole day screwed up.
Yeah. So I think I've definitely been in that mode, like 100%. I don't want to act like I haven't. Like,
Yeah.
I can relate to that very well. I think I've got a good buddy of mine that's very, very successful. I had private equity come in a few times. And like he said, he's like, look, when I go to the gym, he's like, I don't care what time of day it is. He goes, everybody can wait 45 minutes for my phone call back.
Wow.
So he literally leaves his phone in the car. And so again, I think those are like disciplines and habits that, like, if you view going to the gym as important as you do taking that phone call or more important, right, you'll do it. If you don't, then you're like in a state of quagmire. Like, I got to answer, I want to make sure I'm providing customer service, whatever.
You're half-assing both.
And again, I think you got to be intentional. So if your goal, if you write it down, is like to work out, be healthy, do certain things, like you just have to do it. And again, I mean, and I would just say calendar it. Like one of the things that I think has really, really helped me is like how organized I got. And the way I got organized was I actually took the 3 people in my company that I thought were the most organized. I sat them all in a room. I go, show me how you do your Outlook. I literally wanted to know how you send emails, how you sort things, what folders you use. And I copied 80% of what they did and made my own. And I binge watched time management videos. And so, again, we can talk about ChatGPT and a bunch of other things that are kind of like on the forefront right now. But like, what are we all doing to be hyper organized? That then allows us to be very disciplined, which in a weird way then allows us to be able to go to the gym without feeling guilty because we calendared it. And worst case, you call someone back in 45 minutes. And I would argue that if somebody doesn't appreciate that you didn't answer right away and they can't handle that 45-minute lag, find a new client.
For me too, I've always thought, just kind of goes back to, well, this is why I have to wake up at 5 a.m. and go to the gym at 5:30. And maybe that goes back to the scheduling thing. How important is, especially today on this show, you've mentioned so much the word intention. The decision to have everyone take a 10% pay cut during COVID. I'd imagine that's a quick decision. You can't sit there for weeks and weeks and weeks. Well, should we do it? I don't know. What does this person think? What does that person think? How important is that decisiveness? Like, I feel like from your story and we've only met a couple times, but you're an extremely decisive and intentional person. You've mentioned that word a lot today. How important is not just sitting there, well, what do we do? Second guessing yourself. You just go for it.
Yeah. It's very important. And the way that I would kind of maybe challenge us to think through that topic, like Mark Twain used to say, eat a frog in the morning and that's the worst thing that you'll have to do and everything else is easy. So in terms of how does that little saying apply in business, right? I think it's like we procrastinate. If you have a tough phone call to make, human nature is to push it. What you do during that time is you think about it. So if you ate that frog in the beginning and just did the call, I've learned 95% of the time, the call's never as bad as you thought it was going to be. So I have gotten very disciplined at doing things that I know are the right thing to do without overthinking it. At times, I've been known to elongate conversations with team members, and I'm not necessarily proud of that because I don't want to necessarily create paralysis or overtalk something. But usually where my perspective is coming from is I just want to fully understand. Like I want to fully understand what you're saying to me so that I can like believe in it or not. We can talk about it, and then boom, we get aligned, and now we make the decision together, right? So I think my answer back to you is like, yes, being decisive is very important. I also think that when you're not decisive on certain things, you got to just kind of weigh out like, well, what's the worst thing that could happen? The COVID pay cut is a big deal, right? So I don't want to say like I made a quick decision, maybe like a 3-day, 4-day, but like I do believe in the utilitarian principle, which is like what's the greater good for the most amount of people. And so I always kind of govern off of that, right? It's not about me, because if I run around saying it's team and we believe in these things, like it can't just be what's the best for me. My responsibility to the team is to do what's in the best interest of everybody. So if we have an underperforming person, we have to talk to them about that. We need to give them an opportunity, but it's not fair to leave them on the payroll if they're underperforming and they're letting somebody else's job be harder because of that. So that is like I would argue we kind of know what the right decision is most of the time. It's really just a function of, all right, well, how are we going to say it? What are we going to do? What's going to be the repercussion? You start thinking about those kinds of things. So we just need to like honestly have the balls to go do it.
Right. Yeah. Did that take time for you to develop?
I think through maturity, and I think through necessity, and I think through, like I just said, the utilitarian principle and like what we believe in. And I'm a big believer in like, if I say something, I want to do it, right? I don't want to be inauthentic. I'm not going to lie. So if we say certain things that we kind of like sign in blood, so to speak, on our vision and our business plan, or what our goals and objectives are, strategies, then it turns into, I don't have a choice. I have to always make what I think is the right decision all the time. And it has to be prompt because there's 100 decisions to be made. So if I keep pushing, they're just going to keep lagging. And then it's like, now you're talking about anxiety, anxiousness. It's just like, I'm a big believer in like, the guys I know that are super anxious and have a lot of anxiety and that kind of thing, they overthink, in my opinion. I'm not saying it's easy to not overthink. I'm just saying.
And maybe some people are better at managing that than others, of course.
I think, yeah, it's a neurological thing. And I think for sure that's the case. But I think we all at some level just need to have management tools to be able to manage that. So yeah, be decisive. And when you're not decisive, identify it, right? And then why are you not being decisive? And depending on what that hypothetical conversation is, you just have to like take the onion apart and just be like, well, why am I doing that? And then on the next time, don't do it.
Well, I think a lot of it circles back to kind of the Outlook calendar, right? It's like if you are disciplined in your work and you have that calendar set up and it's 5 a.m. I'm waking up. 5:30 I'm headed to the gym. Now I'm doing this now. When do you have time to worry? When do you have time to think about those different scenarios?
I think that's well said. I would fully agree with you on that. It also is very easy that when you are hyper organized, you don't have to worry about remembering what you do tomorrow, because it's a habit that the second I wake up and go to the bathroom, I look at my calendar that day. So then that helps me say, okay, well, how do I dress? What do I need to be prepared for? Is there any last minute thing? Do I need to make a quick phone call before anything? Like, it's such a relieving thing to go to bed, not worrying about what I need to do tomorrow, but then knowing at 6 a.m. in the morning, I'm going to look and I'm going to know. Now, I might look the night before just to like, but my point is that use technology, use that discipline, use that organization to actually suppress the anxiety and the anxiousness.
And in a weird way too, there's so much technology available to have that organization, to increase your discipline, to increase output and all that. But there's also a lot of distraction.
I would fully agree.
So it's like there's a lot of people scrolling social media. I'm a victim of it, man. I'll sit on the toilet and then I'll stand up and like my leg is numb. I'm like, dude, I've been here for like a half hour. Like, what the hell's going on?
Yeah.
That's tricky. That's kind of a hard
You got it. I'm glad you said that, actually. Past. Yeah, that's tough, right? You got to shut it down though. So like, I'll give you an example that's kind of in and around what you just said. So like, I was doing that a lot in terms of health. What supplement do I use? What workout do I do? Like, it's just kind of like, oh my God, what are the 10 articles I haven't read that I need to incorporate? Next thing you know, you're like, you've got no traction. One day you're doing this, another day you're doing this. I'm on all these supplements. I'm like, what's going on?
Exactly.
Right? So it's funny you say that. So this year I actually said to myself, okay, all I'm going to do is I'm going to have creatine before I work out, right? I'm going to have a lean green to get all my micronutrients in terms of the vegetables and that kind of thing, right? I'm going to have protein powder. It's going to be the same protein powder. And that's it. Oh, and BCAAs. Mm-hmm. That's it. For 1 year, I'm not going to even try to add anything else to the mix. And it's freeing because then I don't even seek those articles. And I don't get stuck in that rabbit hole of going down like, am I missing out on something? I'm just doing those 4 things. I'm seeing how they work. And so it's
difficult though. You're on the New York Times, and then there's a new article about this new supplement, these raspberry ketones or whatever, and you're looking through it. How do you combat that? You just go, nope, already made my decision, scroll past it.
Yeah. So I think it's kind of like business, right? Like you have those 4 profiles, you have a stretch, and you dedicate a time to rethink that. So I would say, I decided to do 1 year, but you could maybe say 6 months. So if I read an article about raspberry ketones, which actually sounds kind of interesting, I would say, okay, put that in a folder, and then in my Outlook calendar, I would say, on this particular day, look at that folder to see if you want to reconsider certain things. And so it allows me to feel like I'm not missing out on that item, and it also allows me to say, at the right time, I'll reconsider it. And literally, that's what we do for business. So like, I'm not saying we won't build a Chipotle again or a Starbucks, all that. All I'm saying is that until July, I'm not going to consider it. That's it. Mm. And so again, I think that's maybe a way to like handle that urge or that mindset, so that way you're not like completely, it's getting lost in the shuffle and your inbox, and 6 months later, you're not aware of it.
I love that. I mean, that's awesome. Going back to that Outlook story, you sat down those organized people. It sounds like that's been a huge part of your life now.
Yeah. I mean, it's, how you have like those little baby epiphanies that are like mean nothing to most people, but at the same time, you're like, oh my God, I just got so much more efficient, right? Like that's what happened to me. So I binge watched some time management videos on YouTube, and specifically on how to organize your Outlook. I had 3 people in my office that we all kind of brainstormed that. And then I just took what worked for me and the best practice. And it also it suppressed my anxiousness, right? Because I'm high energy. I can talk a lot. So I have a tendency to like maybe go too fast and just like I can take in everything and multitask. I don't believe in multitasking, but I multitask and I shouldn't, that kind of thing. So again, just the discipline, the intentionality in terms of trying to like really compartmentalize and do it in the right way and be super efficient. Because again, it goes back to like, I want to stay married. I want to be a really good husband. I want to be a really good father. I want to be a really good mentor. I want to be a really good coach. I want to meet guys like you and have time to be able to do all that. How do I do all of that in 45 hours a week? It's hard, but when you actually start compartmentalizing it, like it's all about being more efficient, being more intentional. So everything matters. Like that phone call matters. Like I got to move the needle on that phone call. Otherwise it was wasting my time and I didn't monetize it. Not necessarily always money related, but it wasn't a good use of my time. The opportunity cost of time, like I failed on that, right? And so if you have that kind of mindset, that discipline, it's freeing. Like it's actually fun. Like it's a game. So for me, my dad uses the terminology like corporate athlete, and I used to be an athlete, and I defined myself as an athlete, and we were good at soccer, and we had some good things happen to us and state championships and things like that. And then you stop, right? Now you're in business, and it's like, to me now, it's just the new game. And that's why, like, if you said like, hey, what are one of the things that make you who you are? Like when I say I'm not scared to fail, like I actually want to fail, not in major ways, but that basically is just part of learning. So like, I'm never nervous about saying the wrong thing. That's why I want to be vulnerable, and I want you to be vulnerable, and I want my friends and colleagues, everybody to be vulnerable, because now we don't have to like dance around it. We just, oh man, you're nervous about doing that. Have you thought about this? What about that podcast? Have you listened to this? Hey, I'll shoot you 3 other things. And like, again, if they are disciplined and they care, right? Now all of a sudden we just made that better because he was vulnerable. We invited the conversation to being vulnerable. It's like, I don't know, to me, it's more meaningful in life. And so I'm trying to like perpetuate that mindset through discipline, organization, vulnerability, intentionality.
Do you think, looking back to when you first started the company, kind of like, you didn't have an outlook obviously back in 2003 because you were young and didn't know what it was, and it also didn't even exist back then, really. Had you had that back then, do you think you'd be 5 times as far as you were? Or do you think kind of learning as you go is a part of that process?
So both.
Yeah.
I think that learning as you go is definitely part of the process. I think, one of the things that I want for a guy like you that's 10, 12 years younger than me, or people I care about, is like, we all want to lessen the learning curve. So like, if you can have, like, I wish I had the mind I had now at 27, right? At some level, it's impossible, right? You can't do that. Maturity, experience, things like that. But I would say there's certain things that people can do. And I think a lot of it is environment, who you choose to hang out with. When you're sitting at home, like, how much are you on Instagram watching nothing compared to, maybe bettering your mind? And so I do think in general, that's just like super, super important in what choices you're making. But if I did have the mind I had then, I think there would have been other opportunities, and I could have done more things. And so I think getting an executive coach, my dad is an executive coach now, and I've taken him for granted my whole life. He's my dad. We've got a great relationship, but he's a good guy and he understands business. And so that was a benefit to me. But I would say, there's people out there that are willing and want young people that are go-getters, and they want to help them. And so I would say, reach out to those guys, hang out with them, go to dinner, pay for their dinner, go, encourage that. Because again, I'm inspired by a guy like you that's 12 years younger than me, that, you're an up and comer, you're doing what you're doing. I think you're going to be uber successful. And if there's anything that I can do to help expedite you by a year or two, like, why wouldn't we engage? And why it makes me feel good that you would be able to do that. So I think in general, we all want less of a learning curve and get to where we want to go quicker.
Well, I appreciate that. I think in the beginning too, there's also a sense of competition. Did you deal with that when you were young too? Like, oh, this construction company's doing this, I wish we were doing this, or, oh, they're doing it that way.
Yeah.
And
100%.
Yeah.
And that's a good point.
Being 96 on the list, that must have felt pretty good though. The fact that you even made that list, I'm sure you wanted to be number one.
Yeah. DR Horton was number one. So that was going to be hard to compete with that.
Of course.
But you're exactly right. I think, look, being competitive is kind of like in all of our blood, right? If you're going to take risks and so I do think that being competitive is part of it. I think that being controlled and being competitive is even more impactful. And I would urge everybody to just YouTube Simon Sinek, Infinite versus Finite. What he says is that he gives a story when he was, he was working with a bunch of Apple executives and he was working with a bunch of Microsoft executives, 20 years ago. And Microsoft was constantly saying, well, Apple's doing this, and this is what I think we should do. And did you see that Motorola was doing this, and British Telecom was doing this, but Apple, their interface is like this, right? Where Apple was just saying, we don't care what Microsoft's doing. We want to make, they had like an infinite mindset. It was all about the consumer and how easy it could be. So what Simon Sinek was saying was that to have an infinite mindset, you're playing a game kind of against yourself with a new set of rules. You're not worried about your competitors. Now, I'm lying if I say that that's how I always think all the time. No, I'm a human being and I want to crush the guy next to me, but at the same time, I want to do it with humility and all that. But I do try to say, hey, we're playing that infinite mindset. And so I've watched that particular video multiple times just to keep it fresh in my mind, because I know that's the right mindset. And then am I perpetuating the right mindset on a consistent basis? And if I make a mistake and I perpetuate a finite mindset because I worry about my competitor and I'm going to make business decisions based off that, that's not healthy. I try to identify it. I'll say sorry real quick, or hey, we shouldn't do that. I know I said that, and come back to it. But I would just say, yes, it exists, but I would urge everybody to try to have like an infinite mindset. It's more fulfilling, and I think I think Apple played their cards right. I think Microsoft actually shifted. I think 10 years later, I think Microsoft started having a different perspective, doing different things, having a different model, having more of an infinite mindset model compared to a finite.
All these different podcasts, books, speakers, YouTube videos you've mentioned, it seems like you reach out often for new information. Do you think that that's something that's kind of instrumental in, you know, you pursuing whatever vision you have for Bay to Bay properties?
Yeah, I think, you know, one of the things that I think, you know, maybe an attribute that I have that is a good attribute is just relationships, right? So I think I'm a relational guy. And I think that in doing that, it requires being authentic because so it just does. But I think like what I try to do is look around and see who's doing things that are better than me, or at a, you know, they're at a 9 out of 10 and I'm at a 5 out of 10. And then if I can research a little bit, or if I can have conversations with them, or I can, you know, suppress that learning curve of like, hey, how are you setting things up? Why are you doing this? You'll learn. You invite that conversation and you learn from them. And it doesn't necessarily need to be like me and you. It could be a podcast. It could be a book. It could be, you know, a bunch of different things. That's
the beauty of today, right? You can kind of go on YouTube, books, whatever, and find that information.
And I think the one thing that I'm personally trying to work on right now is, again, just sticking with that intentionality side of things. Is like, yes, I might want to get good at 20 things, but what are the top 3 that need to get done in the next 3 months? And then only focus on that. So what I have learned is like, I would get confused a little bit, right? Because like, I want to be better. So the next thing you know, I'm binge watching Simon Sinek, you know, Tony Robbins, every podcast you can think of, Joe Rogan, certain stuff, Jordan Peterson, you know, I'm watching all this stuff and I'm kind of like, all right, well, I'm absorbing information, but am I really then putting it into practice tomorrow and the next day? And I really wasn't, right? It was like, yes, it increased my awareness.
It turns into entertainment at a certain point versus, hey, I'm actually listening to this to take notes and to implement this in my life.
Yep, 100%. So think about it like where everybody falls short, most people fall short, right? Is that it doesn't turn into an action, or it doesn't turn into a behavior change. So I think like if you really care about moving the needle, awareness is the first thing, right? It kind of goes back to that identification thing that I said. Next thing is a strategy. Okay, so what are you going to do? Then you got to go execute on it. And so what I've learned is that, you know, visual reminders for me have been very helpful in terms of who I want to be and what I'm working on. So right now, the number one thing that's on my whiteboard in my office, literally it says, JF, get better at. Number 1 is slow down, right? Number 2 is invite the conversation. Number 3 is get the other person's perspective before you get theirs. Number 4 is mirror. And so until I get really good at those things and they become habit for me, and I would give myself like at least an A- on that, I'm leaving it up on the board because it helps remind me every single day, multiple times a day.
Almost in the same way you kind of spoke about, hey, I'm going to give this thing 1 year. I'm going to give this thing 6 months, like focusing on that goal, you know, or direction with a time frame, right? That kind of seems like that is how you move forward in life without being distracted by all this information that's out there.
Yeah. And it goes back to your question on like being decisive. Like you have to make decisions, right? I remember something stupid, like going back to like high school, right? When you're dating a girl and then it's like, oh, I really shouldn't be dating her. Like what I would do is I would just on a calendar be like, if I'm feeling wishy-washy on this day, it's done. And then like, I wasn't a liar to myself. So literally that day would come and be like, this isn't working out. That's how I had like 3 breakups in my life, was literally because I calendared it.
Literally, this actually happened in your life.
Yeah, 3 times. So, but again, and part of that was just like it gave me the confidence to be able to do it because I'd given it enough time. 3 months was enough time. Why am I feeling wishy-washy about this? Nope, done. And so I think like we all, like what the number one thing that bothers me about people in general that I care about, like people that I care about and I talk with, I really hate the dreamers. I can't stand it. Oh man, we should. Why don't we? Have you thought about, right? It's like talk.
Don't you have to be a dreamer though to create what you've created and what I'm trying to create?
I would say 100%, but then I would just say like, we got to put that timestamp on it. Or like, okay, now that we've dreamt, like how much do you want to dream? Do you want to dream and die? No, you want to dream, act on the dream, right? Fulfill the dream. Now you have a good story. So for me, I don't mean to poo-poo the dreamers. I just can't sit there and dream month after month, year after year with the person on the same topic. Like, oh, Joe, I really wanted to like I wanted to get a bunch of rental properties. Okay, you've been saying that for 5 years. What do you think step 1 should be? How about you just get 1, right? Like, so for me, it's like, I want to deal with the guys that's why I like to always like bait a little bit. And what I mean by that is like, if you said something like that to me, I say, hey, why don't you do this, think through it, send me a plan that you have. I'll give you my opinion on it, whatever. You do that. And then that just showed me that you actually followed up with me. And then if you actually go buy a house or do that, like now all of a sudden, okay, you're one of those guys now. So yeah, you dreamt, but you also did. So like all I want to do right now is hang out with doers.
Tyler's shaking his head right now. He's looking for his first rental property.
Okay.
Right now he's in the saving money phase, but that's a part of it.
100%.
That's the first step. You got to have that down payment. That's freaking awesome, man. So you've really always been a student of your calendar, even when you were in high school breaking up with girlfriends. I think that's hilarious, number one, but amazing, number two. You've kept up with that for so long. I had an interview with a potential intern from the University of Tampa. This kid is a total stud. He's the next president of UT's real estate club. He is the president of his fraternity. He's doing this, and he's a straight A student, and all this stuff. And even I'm like a decade older than he is. I'm like, bro, how you doing all this, man? How do you have the time to do all that? In college, that was not the way I was. I was distracted by the partying and the football games and all that sort of stuff. Academics for me was unfortunately not what I was focused on. So when I meet a college kid who's just crushing it and he's social and he's having fun and all that stuff, I'm curious to know, man, how do you do it? And it's funny. He said, I'm a student of my calendar. I book by the 15-minute block what I'm doing every day, my obligations, homework block, fraternity block, real estate club block, all this sort of stuff. And he still has time to come meet with me and get dressed up and come do an interview.
Yeah. That's
so
awesome.
It's kind of, I think when you're always searching for answers, you hear the same answers. And just in the past couple of weeks, the calendar thing has come up so much, hasn't it? Right? So much, man. So I'm definitely going to implement that.
That kid, right? Like another way to think about the calendar thing is checklist, right? And there is actually neuroscience talking about dopamine rushes by literally checking something off a list. Okay. And so, our entire company, when I talk about SOPs, what are SOPs, right? Standard operating procedures. What are they? They're checklists. They're just tons and tons of checklists. And that's how you scale. That's how you create SOPs, right? There's a certain way to do it. Here's what we think is the best way. We're not going to argue whether it's the best way or not until 6 months, and then we'll rethink it if we need to. But until then, check the boxes. So again, if you've got 10 things to do and you wake up tomorrow and you only do 2 of them, like you're misaligned. You're not taking it serious. And then also that attribute of just ignoring it, it's going to happen again the next day. It's going to happen again the next day. Now all of a sudden you're not a serious person, right? And so I think using that kid as an example, if he's very organized, he has a bunch of checklists, what that does is it helps him like, oh, I got to get off this phone call because I got to still get that thing done. It's already 4:00. And I know guys that are literally like timers will go off. I mean, I'm like that a little bit, right? I'll have 3 timers go off sometimes a day because I'm like, no, you didn't get it done. And if I don't get it done, phone goes over there, crank it out for 20 minutes. Now it's done. And so again, that discipline, I think like helps move that needle because I actually get, if you think about it, it's almost like an addict mentality. Like I get anxious when I can't check the list. I have bad things happen to me when I say I'm going to do 10 things and I only did 5.
Yep.
I feel like a failure. I don't like it. It doesn't feel good. So I want the opposite of that feeling, right? And then the other thing is, well, if you put 10 things on the list, but you really only have capacity and time to do 6, well, why did you write 10? So you have to also manage, like don't put a goal that's like completely unachievable and you're going to fail it every time. And again, I would just say too, like I'm an A- guy, right? Like what I mean by that is we actually wrote in our company, like it was actually really tough to do this because at some level I didn't believe in it, but I do now and I'll explain it. You can push back on me if you want. I don't think people value A+. And I almost mean that in general in almost anything. Your boy at University of Tampa, right? If he can run around and say, I got A's all through school. Okay, cool. Did you have like a 4.6 or I don't know what the grade scale is. Let's just say 90's an A. Is a 92, you can run around saying you got A's your whole life, is the same as a 99, but there was amount of time and energy and effort that was put in to get that extra 7 points or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So when I think about that from a company standpoint, I'm like, man, I want to be A+, right? But then I started realizing the amount of energy and effort to put in to be an A+, especially compared to some of the competitors, even though I just gave that whole infinite finite game, the customer didn't value it. They weren't going to pay me $100,000 more to give them a 99. They wanted to save the $100,000 and give me a 91.
Like when is it good enough?
And agreed. And then also it's just like, to me, it's like the value associated with it. So to me, the way I define value would be like, all right, is it what the customer signed up for? But I don't want to go so far and above and beyond that it took extra time, extra resources. There was inefficiencies associated with it, and the customer didn't even value it. I think the majority of the world is mostly good with A minuses. So I still want to do an A. Now, you might argue, yeah, but if you shoot for a 92 and you fail a little bit, now you got an 88. Good point. And I would agree with you, right? So maybe you need to shoot for a 95 so you can still get a 92. I don't know.
Or maybe there's, hey, I'm shooting for a 100, but if I fall in the 95, 93, 92, I'm satisfied, a level of satisfaction to it.
I would say this. I would say, my answer back to you on that would be, if you're shooting for 100, you have a little bit of like human error, right? That, yeah, you maybe get a 95. Like, I think that that's acceptable. I just think that if you're really shooting for 100, that let's go to school, because it's easy to think about. In order to get 100, let's just say you have to study for 20 hours. Okay. So are you going to go study for 20 hours and try to get 100? Or if I told you could get a 92 and study for 10 hours, which one would you choose?
Of course, the 92.
Most people would choose a minimum. My dad would actually do the 21 because he just needs to get a 99.9 or 100 every time, which is a different issue. But I would say, like, I think most people would choose a minimum. So what you're kind of telling me indirectly is that you are not valuing that extra 10 hours to get those extra 7 points, right? So now apply it to business. And what does that mean in your world, right? And so, if you had to go, if the customer was going to give you a 5-star rating, right, but it took you 100 hours, would you be cool with a 4.5-star rating and it only took you 50? I think my answer right now is yes. I think that's a better use of time. And so basically what I'm saying is I'm cool with getting a 4.5 star, and I'm kind of, obviously these are hypotheticals,
right?
And so, but at the same time, I am urging us to think through what is high value, how much time and energy needs to go into it, and are we putting time and energy into things that aren't valuable in the eye of the beholder?
I'm reading a book right now. You probably know it, Ninja Selling.
Yeah.
Super cool. And it relates directly to my industry, real estate sales. So okay. I'm really enjoying it. And it kind of talks about I'm only halfway through it. I'll probably read this like 5 times, but I'll get it down. But it's something about the emotional scale, like the spiraling emotional scale, and how you want to kind of stay in that positive upper end, and you want to keep yourself in that kind of higher state because it's better for customers, it's better for your family, you're more efficient that way. For you, mindset, right? Positivity, believing that your efforts will achieve, the result you're looking for. How do you deal with that? I mean, you have a big life, right? Stuff goes wrong, your kid gets in trouble at school, whatever. You're very successful. Are there days where you're like, oh my God, this happened and that happened, and then I got a flat tire. Oh, what do I do? I mean, how do you get yourself out of those holes?
I would say that I'm human, right? And so that's a probing question, and I think that that's accurate. I think that, what I try to do is, it's not just like blanket optimism, right? Like, oh, you get a flat tire. What? This is a great opportunity to see the sun.
The reason I ask it is you are a very positive, optimistic person. So I'm trying to figure out, like, man, you seem that way. You seem like, oh, I got a flat tire. Well, at least my car didn't blow up. You know what I mean? Yeah. You definitely have that perception.
Yeah. So for me, it's like, I guess the way I would answer that is like, you'd maybe have to throw a few more hypotheticals at me just so I can be like more honest if I'm trying really hard to like think through it. Like, if I got a flat tire, I'm calling AAA and they're going to fix it for me, and I'm going to be on problem call working the whole time. Right. So like, I would have a plan B. If there's tough situations at work that come up, I'm going to just handle them diligently. And my perspective is that, what's the worst case scenario? I go bankrupt. I don't want that to happen, but like, I'll recover. Right. So like, I think there's a little bit of, I'm not as scared as I don't have a lot of those anxious, scared thoughts. And I think that that's unique to me. Maybe I've done certain things. Maybe I'm just overly optimistic at times. I think I'm busy, and I am busy a lot, and I'll find the good in a lot of things. And I'll always like stretch myself to learn. So I don't find myself in that situation on a frequent basis. Mm-hmm. If I do, then I try to just like change my environment.
It almost sounds like you're saying a no-lose scenario. And I don't mean, obviously you can lose. You can not get the job. You can lose money, et cetera. But a no-lose scenario, as in you get the flat tire, well, it's an opportunity to get some work done, get some emails, and wait for AAA. Like it's not a loss. It's, hey, there's just another avenue I need to go down to achieve whatever I'm trying to achieve.
Yeah, and I think it's, look, I mean, there's people that have had horrible things happen to them in life that, you know, we don't even need to name, but it's like as horrible as you could think that like makes a flat tire look like a walk in the park. And you know, you see those people, and I think it's also just, so here's what I'd say. You're still going to go through the emotional side of everything, right? I'm frustrated, I'm sad, I'm grieving, whatever the trigger was. You know, my dad and I talk a lot about just like capturing your mind, right? Like how do you not let it grab you? And so I think what I've gotten decent at is I still have those emotions that happen. I just have them so much quicker. So I might get pissed that the tire's flat, then I'm late to something, whatever those scenarios are that are like 5 bad things that happen right away. But then what I can do is I'll just quickly make that like a 15-minute thing instead of it ruin my day.
Has that time scale shortened for you?
Definitely, because I've gotten better at being aware that I'm in it, number one, right? Sometimes it's called the grip, right? You're in the grip. I'm aware that I'm in it. And then I'm also aware of what is my management tool to get myself out of it. And I've had some bad things happen. I mean, recently I've had a family member that it's just, I really didn't, first time in my life, like it just didn't go the way that I wanted it to go. And it was a tough feeling for me. And I was like going to bed sleeping. When I was sleeping, I was like thinking about it. And so it's funny because what I've learned is you compartmentalize it, right? Bad things can happen. Certain time goes on. I was aware of it. So I just tried to work out a little bit more, do certain things, like convince myself of whatever good could come from it, right? But I was fishing a little bit to do that. And then honestly, time kind of helps. And so the biggest thing I would say is like if people are going through divorces, if they're going, it's like, just know that there is a grieving process. And then what are you doing to just make that experience not be 2 years, not be 1 year, not be 6 months? How can you make it just less? And I also don't want to be like, I do think some things come a little easier for me because of maybe circumstances when I was growing up or whatever. So it's not like I'm judgmental. Okay, you get divorced. It takes you a year to grieve and then, are good. I don't know. Maybe it takes you 2 years, maybe it's 3 months. Maybe I'm not saying the timetable has to be what I'm saying. It's just a function of recognizing it and then trying to just kind of respond in a emotionally mature way and fill your head with the right things because if your goal is to get over it, don't you want to get over it as quick as possible? So is there value in not getting over it quicker? Those would be the questions I would ask myself.
Your father being really kind of intuitive in that sense with his emotions. I mean, kind of just, I guess, briefly, he was an executive with what company did you mention?
Yeah, so it was a company, probably his biggest job was a company called Westel Technologies. He brought them public in 1997.
Wow.
If people remember the DSL modems, they manufactured like 85% of them in the country.
Amazing. So a huge job, obviously. But he also sounds like he was extremely there for his family and his children and all that. And then talking with you too, you just mentioned about that kind of managing your emotions. I think that's super important. And that's something I'm going to really focus on when that baby comes here in 6 weeks is being a good father and kind of letting that child know very early on, like, hey, look, it's cool to get sad. It's cool to have those emotions. It's completely natural. You just mentioned with everything you've got going on in your life, you still get pissed. You still get emotional. How long are you going to sit there for? I think that's a really, really interesting point. I love that a lot.
And also what if it takes you a week and it takes me a day, I don't know, did I do it too quick and I didn't revel in those emotions and that wasn't healthy?
That's the danger too, right? Some people are, we say sociopathic.
Like, I don't care. Yeah,
right,
don't
exactly.
Care about anything, right? So, and you'll see that with your kid, right? I mean, it's normal. Your kid will end up liking mommy a lot more at a certain time than they'll like you a lot more at a certain time.
That's going to be tough.
Yep. And so, again, I think that awareness is the answer. My dad he's a very, the good thing, and we always kind of joke around my dad that he's crazy, and he takes that as a compliment. I mean, he's 70 years old. He's getting his PhD from Liberty University. I think he's on marathon number 72 or something like that, because he always wants a couple more than his age. He wakes up at 4:30 in the morning. So, my mom used to always joke around, and I know they might watch this, but she's like, as long as it's not a young blonde, he can kind of do whatever he wants, which was like a hilarious comment coming from my mom if you knew her.
Oh my God.
But I think my dad was, he is very much like the epitome of discipline, of organization.
What's your father's name?
Rob Fall. And he was in the 3 Million Mile Club on American Airlines when I was in high school and college. I mean, he literally commuted from Ascot, Scotland, to Florida. When I was in college, he was in Silicon Valley, coming back and forth. So anyway, he wasn't there actually because he was traveling a lot. But my recollection was that he was always there.
Amazing.
Yeah, really. When I think about it, it's weird to me because I remember him being at all my soccer games. I remember him being available to me. And so I think, that's what I want for my kids. That's what you're going to want. And I think they also, I got to learn that, hey, dad had to work and mom got to stay at home because of that. Now she ended up being a preschool teacher as well, but that was a choice they made that they had to sacrifice when they weren't making good money. And we were going to Catholic school and we had the worst car out of the whole car line, but they made those decisions for certain reasons and they stuck together. And I don't know, it was like a very disciplined household. I remember if I didn't have my shirt tucked in at soccer, like if my dad was showing up, I was tucking my shirt in right away. If my hair went a little bit below my eyebrows or something, like I knew we were in trouble. I remember one time my brother went on a soccer trip to Chile, comes back with earring in his ear. And I'm like, dude, you're freaking dead, man. And in the car, my dad was just driving. My brother was behind in the seat. I was sitting right there. And he's like, Tommy, before we get out of the car, let's make sure that earring's out. That was it. And Tommy's like, but dad, and me and my mom are looking at my brother. We're like, dude, you better do that. But he wasn't like an authoritative in that way. It was just like, that was in his mind, not being judgmental if people have earring stuff, but it's like at his mind in that moment, that wasn't discipline to him. He didn't want us to have that. He's like, when you're 18, you can do whatever you want. But right now in my house, you're not having an earring, you're not having tattoos, you're going to tuck your shirt in. So there was certain discipline things. And I look back now, at the time it was annoying as hell and I didn't agree with it. But right now it's like, I tell my kid all the time, tuck your shirt in at baseball.
Amazing.
So
yeah. I think what you said about him not physically being there, but looking back on your life, it's like he was always there. What a cool thing to say about your dad, because I think the reality is, as an entrepreneur business owner, I'm probably not going to be there all the time. That's just not my reality.
Yeah.
Now in the beginning I might be. I'll be able to work from home for a few weeks, of course. But there's going to get a time where we start to grow and get more agents and get more people on board where my time, my literal physical time, needs to be at work.
Yeah.
But I think when you're at home shifting and kind of like what you mentioned earlier about the email playing with the kid, you really have to dial in and have the intention. All right, I'm going to put the phone away for 25 minutes and I'm playing with my son.
So I would make the argument that I can have a more impactful, valuable engagement with my kids in an hour and a half than I could on a whole day at times. And the reason I say that is because of everything we're talking about, right? You're going to be so intentional and so engaged, and the questions you're going to ask them, especially when they get old enough that they can talk back, is going to be so impactful that you just felt so connected in that 1.5 hours compared to it being 20 hours of nothingness or whatever. So again, and I think about that at work, right? When you're having a meeting, like all your meetings should be very impactful and valuable. So I think like I would just challenge you, like when you're having this kid, it's going to be a big change, right? Is like, it's not about in my opinion, it's not about the quantity. It's about the quality. And the quality has to be defined by like that engagement, and you'll feel it. Like you'll know, right? And there'll be times when you're disengaged and like you're leaving, and it's like, it is what it is. And I can make an argument too that I want my kids to see me work my butt off because I want to be a good role model for them, and I want them to work their butt off. And I don't want them to think right now they think that money's just there and they can buy this and they can buy that. And I'm worried a little bit that they don't have and you have different personality in kids. So my oldest is a little different than my youngest, but you don't want that wrong message as well. So I would say that the answer is just to have these kinds of conversations, be aware, and then come up with a little strategy. And if you can be impactful and valuable as much as you possibly can, it's going to have like better, the ROI on that is just so much more than just you're always there.
And getting mom and the wife on board too, right? I mean, if she's, why are you always gone? You're never around. Blah, blah. I mean, if you have that kind of dragging you down, that's a real problem.
Well, and you know what my mom used to say that now looking back, I really respect it a lot is she's like, I used to always look forward to your dad coming home on the weekends. I missed him. I was like, wow. Like, I wonder if my wife misses me like that every single day I come home, right? And so I just thought that was interesting. And then also the way she talked about him to us. It was always very, well, your father's doing this and he's working hard to do this. And so there was a level of respect she was instilling in us without him even being there. And then when he would call, I remember he used to always bring us keychains, right? Anywhere he went, and he went to a lot of different countries. And so the first thing when we were little, I was like, Dad, did you give us a keychain? Like literally the first word, instead of even giving him a hug and saying hi, like what keychain did you get us? So my mom would coach us up like, hey, make sure you ask him how his day was or how did the trip go and that. Then you can ask for the keychain. So my point is, it's just there's all these little things that it all just comes from awareness and it's all situational. There's 100 little instances that we could all point to. Mm-hmm. But I think if you're aware and then you're intentional and you just care about that ROI and the true value and the impact, you're gonna make good choices.
Amazing.
Worst case, you make a wrong choice and you fix it again real quickly.
As quick as you possibly can, right? Well, Joe, listen, I don't know if I've gone back and listened to any of my podcasts. I think I listened to David Clemens maybe for like 20 or 30 minutes. That's actually when he called me. I was literally listening to the podcast with David. Yeah. He called me. He was like, hey man, Joe Fall, the whole thing. You guys got to meet. I will definitely listen to this one. This was so much good information as a young entrepreneur, starting a family. I mean, this was great for me. So I really appreciate you coming on the show.
No problem at all. It was very fun.
We've gone for 2 hours now though. So
I was going to second that. I'm definitely going to watch this like 100 times over this pet.
I saw you taking notes, Tyler.
Oh yeah. I'm going to take even more notes after watching it again and again and again.
I love it.
Hopefully got a good editor, get it down to an hour or something manageable for everybody. So
we'll cut the whole thing down. It'll be one full episode. You know, we'll probably fix that beginning portion or whatever, but we'll figure it out. If people want to find you, follow you, you mentioned you're kind of starting a podcast. How can people reach you?
Yeah. So, podcast kind of TBD. So nothing on that. I just think, my email address is jfaw@betabayproperties.com, betabayproperties.com. I'm not a big social media guy. So I might need to step my game up a little bit on that front. But I would say just email is probably the best way.
All right, everyone. Email Joe Fall. Thank you so much again. Appreciate it, man.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Bye, everybody.